Good afternoon. My name is Bob Elias, and I'd like to welcome you to our 8th program of the fall quarter for the Speakers Program. Today we have with us Arthur Erskine Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell was born in Coweta County, Georgia in 1903, and later attended universities of Virginia and Pennsylvania. Before taking up writing, Mr. Caldwell worked as a cotton picker, stagehand, and professional football player. Later on, he served as a war correspondent in Russia for Life magazine, as well as a correspondent in Mexico, Spain, and Czechoslovakia. Mr. Caldwell has written numerous books. Among the most famous are Tobacco Road and God's Little Acre. Today, Mr. Caldwell will speak for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we will open up the floor to questions and answers and give you a chance to accept or reject his attitudes towards reading and writing. It's now my pleasure to introduce Mr. Erskine Caldwell.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I am here as a practicing writer and not as a proficient speaker, because as you know, anyone who's ever tried to write anything at all, it's very difficult to use the English language. I understand that there are many languages that are much easier to master than English. So I've been told. I don't know any other language. But what bothers me about writing is the inadequate language that I have to use, because you probably have seen this strip or comic strip in which plays are made on words as we use them. For example, the word analyze. Well, immediately when I see the word analyze, I am thinking that Anna is telling a lie. When I see the word pharmacology, for example, I think that's a college for farmers. That's my handicap, because I have studied Latin, Greek, and so forth, and I see the combination of all these words put together, but they're not American. It's a foreign language to me. And when you're communicating by words, whether they're spoken words or the written words, you always wonder if the listener or the reader gets the same meaning out of a word that the writer himself does. If I were proficient enough, I think I'd probably write a American language dictionary and throw out all the combined words that we have to use today. And when you come right down to it, the spoken word probably carries more meaning than the written word, because you don't have to see it. You hear it. And that sense is a little more keen sometimes than the eyesight sense is. For example, we take a word of many syllables in which we speak and we slur it and so forth, but once in a while a few good words come out of the spoken mouth as we use it. You may have heard that what happens to the translation of speech and languages and so forth. Not long ago, Mr. Spiro Agnew went over to South Vietnam, and he was touring a hospital where injured soldiers were. And he came to one young man who was trussed up in his bed with a broken arm and a broken leg and so forth. And he asked this young soldier how he came to be hurt or wounded in the war. Well, the young man tried to explain to him. He said, when I came over here, when I was drafted out of college and came over here to Vietnam, I asked my sergeant, how can I tell the difference between a North Vietnamese and a South Vietnamese, the friend or the enemy? Well, the sergeant explained to him, he said, I've been here a long time and I know the whole works. So when you go out there on patrol and you see a Vietnamese and you don't know which one he is, friendly or enemy, all you have to do is shout out the national emblem of all Vietnamese people, which is Ho Chi Minh. And if he shoots you, then you know he's your enemy. And if he doesn't shoot you, he might be your friend. Well, this soldier was explaining to Spiro Agnew what had happened to him. He said, I went out on this patrol, and I saw this Vietnamese in the road, and I shouted out at him, Ho Chi Minh. Well, this Vietnamese shouted right back at me, Spiro Agnew. And while we were out there shaking hands, a truck came along and ran over both of us. Well, being in this word business as I am, a retailer of words, I like to hear the consequences of the written language, as well as to listen to the spoken language that I have to use. And there was this, speaking about Vietnam, there was this college student who was drafted much against his principles, which you know what his principles were. So he was drafted and sent to a training camp. And while he was there, he spent all of his time walking around the camp grounds looking for scraps of paper. And whenever he found one, he picked it up and looked at it and read it, and then threw it away and said, that's not it. Well, this went on for so long that the sergeant became worried as to why this young man spent all of his time looking for paper on the ground, picking it up and throwing it away and saying that that's not it. That he finally sent him to the Army psychiatrist to find out what was wrong with him. And the psychiatrist examined the young man for several hours. Unsuccessfully, he was never able to find out why he would spend all of his time picking up paper and looking at it and throwing away and saying that's not it. So he wrote out an official Army discharge as being unfit for military service. And he handed it to the young man. He looked at the paper, smiled, and said, that's it. Well, we get all these different meanings out of the communication field, whether it's on radio, television, books, or whatever the media is. And what interests me so much, being a writer, not on TV, not on radio, and anything else, but only as using the written word, is the fact that we really don't communicate anything, because what we put down is a language that everybody knows. Everybody knows all the words that we put down. So what does the reader get out of what we write? Well, I'll tell you what he gets out of it. Each individual writer is going to get something different out of that sentence, out of that paragraph. It's not going to have a universal meaning. That's impossible for everybody to comprehend what the writer had in mind. And so that's the diversity of writing. That's why there are more than one writer, I suppose, in the whole world. But anybody can do this. Anybody can put the words down. But the meaning eventually is going to come out of the mind of the reader himself. Well, of course, that's not the way to make life cohesive by any means. If we write a manifesto that everybody accepts, we may have to do it under duress and not by free choice. But at the same time, that's the important principle of our civilization, that for somebody to make the rules and regulations that we have to follow. We might not like them, but somebody's going to write these rules down, and you when you read this rule and this regulation, you say, I don't like that. All right, that's your privilege. So go ahead and say, I protest against this rule and regulation. But somebody's got to write it down and make the law, make the regulations, and what we're going to do is up to the individual. Now, I am not so much an advocate of universal acceptance of anything, because I think once you say you must do this, you must believe that, well, then I think that's the danger of civilization, that it's become cramped into a pocket, into a corner. We're going to stand there and wail and writhe and never be able to express our own opinions, express our own feelings about anything. So, coming right down to it, where are we? We write it the written word, which we use as a spoken word, but they're always the same words. So the meaning is going to come out of your mind, and your reactions are going to be individual. They're not going to be standardized, no matter what the writing says. I would like to stop right now and see if anyone wants to agree with me or disagree, and maybe we can have some interesting ideas.
All right, we'll have a mic coming to you, and if you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll get it to you. Here's one over here.
Mr. Caldwell, do you think in novels that the narrator should interfere with the action of the story, or that the narrator should assume the role of the characters that he's writing about?
The narrator?
Yes.
Well, now, you see, here we come to a point I suppose every writer has to face, is whether he's going to express his own personal opinions about something through the words of a character. Well, to me, the character is the only authentic voice, not the writer himself, because you'll probably end up with propaganda of some kind. I don't know what kind it would be, but if every writer could express his philosophy in a fiction story, and we're speaking about fiction, through the mouth of a character, well, then I think it's a false premise to begin with, that it's not true fiction, it's not true creative writing, because then the character is being denied his own individuality, and you only have the opinions of the author himself. So I would not want to accept that. I would not want to have to work that way.
Mr. Caldwell, I'd like to know, at some point in your career, when you were starting out, you must have asked yourself what shape your career would take. I'd like to know what, very simply, I'd like to know why you write. It seems to be a very indirect means of action. I'd like to know what considerations led you to become a writer.
It's very difficult for a person to go back too far in his childhood, I suppose, to really pinpoint that. I can only say that I was living a life that was interesting to me when I was very young. I associated with people who interested me. They were working people in the South. They were black, they were white, people of all status, we'll say, that did exist in the South at any time. There might have been very poor or medium wealthy or actually wealthy. Well, these were the people that interested me, and the actions of these people, not so much their speech, but what they did, for example, and how they did what they did, intrigued my interest to the point where I wanted to tell what they were doing. Now, I did not always approve of what they did, not by any means, but to be authentic about it, I had to tell as I saw. And that, as I said, intrigued me to the point where I wanted to write it down. I don't know why. I had no ambition to be a oral storyteller. I wanted to be a written storyteller. So that was a very early point in life, we'll say it anywhere from the age of 12 to 18, when I was influenced by the life around me in a small town, the customs, the mores of the community were the things that interested me very much. And I had to just write it down. I had to try to write it down. Let me put it that way. I didn't succeed for a long time, but that's when I began trying to write down the actions and the mores of people.
Do we have another question? Right here. Over there, right over there.
Okay. I understand that you wrote some screenplays, and I wonder what effect you feel that writing these had on your writing in general in Hollywood.
I don't get
What effect did writing screenplays have on your writing in general?
good writing what?
Screenplays.
I'm sorry I didn't hear it directly from you, but I think I know what the question is. I'm not knocking the writing of screenplays. We have to have screenplays. Whatever the effect might have been, I would say it was an experience that I may have incorporated in some way or another in my work, in my fictionizing or my novel writing or short story writing. But you see, screenwriting is an entirely different medium. It is like being a playwright, and I'm not a playwright. I'm not a screenwriter, but I did try my hand at it, and I did not succeed. The other person who did succeed at screenwriting is to be admired, because it is a field that I do admire. Anyone who can write a screenplay or write a play itself. Now, how it affected me, I don't know. I assumed it just sort of slid off of me in some way and did not do anything one way or the other.
I was just wondering if I could ask a question about, since you say you admire the screenwriter, what did you think of the movie versions of Tobacco Road and Guys of Little Acre?
Well, of course, I'm not here to sell tickets to either one. I can say this, that Tobacco Road as a film was made in 1941, I believe, when it was released. In those days, there was a concerted drive in American life to, well, it was the age of censorship, we'll say. Well, this affected the making of that film to the extent that it was completely watered down. It was completely bland. It was never authentic in the sense that the stage play was. It was never authentic in the sense that the novel itself was. So it was a very poor transference to that medium. And I would hope that maybe someday that there can be a remake made of that particular film with more permissive attitudes towards it, I would say. And as for the other film, Guys of Little Acre, I was very much pleased with that. I had very little to do with it. I was not the screenwriter on that, but I was on the locations, on the sets, and so forth. And I saw the film coming out the way it should have been done, even before it ever got printed on the film. So I was very pleased with that. And then I will say that there's one more film that you did not mention, which I'm glad you did not ask about. That's the film with the name of Claudel English, and I heard that it was so poor that I have never gone to see it myself.
Do you have any other questions?
Mr. Caldwell, you said words are often misunderstood. What do you think the meaning of peace would be to the general American public? As I see it, it means we will have peace when everyone in the world agrees with our economic, political, and social ideas, and no one criticizes us. That's as I view the United States view of peace. What is your own personal view of peace, and what do you think the United States general public's view of peace is? The definition.
What did you get out of that question now? That's it. Peace. You know, you make me stop and ponder because I have never thought of a definition of that. The nearest I could come to it offhand would be the absence of conflict. Now, in my mind, there will never be an absence of conflict or conflicting ideas or purposes in life. So I can never say that. I could say that, in my opinion, there is no peace and there will be no peace in that sense. Now, if you're talking about armed conflict, that's a different matter. That's something that the world itself has to join in to accomplish. Not the one individual, but the every nation that would have the inclination to make war. Whether that's going to be accomplished by the UN or some other medium, I don't know. But peace to me, essentially, means the absence of conflict of any kind, whether it's in the house, the home, the state, the nation, or the world. Absence of conflict that injures somebody else in some way. It might be a moral conflict or it might be a physical conflict.
I believe we had a question over here somewhere. Right over here.
Yes, Mr. Caldwell, I'd like to ask you what you think of as a writer, what you think of the level of entertainment in newspapers and television today.
He wants to know the
Level of entertainment in newspapers and TV today.
in my opinion, the level of it.
Yes.
Well, you know, that's what, in technical terms, is what I suppose censorship is all about, or freedom is all about, or freedom of the press is. What are the community standards? Well, when I hear that expression, community standards, I really don't know what it means, because what community are they speaking of? Shall Los Angeles community have a different standard than San Francisco, for example? Well, why should it? To me, it's not a community, it's a national or nationwide standard. Now, that's going to be made by the whole nation of people, not by a committee in Los Angeles or a committee in Detroit. That's when you get involved in local censorship. It's when you have a community standard set by the police department, we'll say, in Detroit. Well, that's not conducive to national life. Now, as to what we do have as of now nationwide, I would say that the freedom of expression is what everybody has been striving for. That is what everybody who communicates will say, whether he's a filmmaker or newsreel maker or writer or whatnot. Even a speaker must have freedom. Well, sure, we have it now, but maybe there's going to be a reaction, because for every action there's supposedly going to be a reaction. So if we continue escalating the freedom of speech and freedom of films and freedom of so forth, the danger is that we'll reach a pinnacle of this, and this reaction will set in and we'll go right back to the dark ages again. So as it is right now, I'm willing to accept the so-called community standards as they are described.
There was a question over here, this young lady.
I actually have two questions, possibly interrelated.
Could you speak up, please? I can't hear.
Yeah. First, from your answers in response to earlier questions, it sounds as though your concept of the novelist is to transcribe events or and characters. It sounds as though they're people you know. Is that generally the case with your novels, and do you have a comment about that generally, whether that seems to be the novelist's aim. And also, you earlier had a question about movies. I was wondering if you think that the rise in film has affected the novel, especially if the idea is to just tell stories.
What is the gist of that speech now?
In your books, you're saying the characters transcribed? Is that what you do in your books? You know, transcribe characters. And the second question was, what do you think of? Do you think the rise in the film has affected the book?
Well, you're asking me to describe my work and to criticize or to praise my own work, which I'm not very good at doing. I usually leave that to the reader and the critic to form his own opinions of what I do. So I would like to beg off from trying to justify what I do, because I can only justify the acts of the characters, not my opinion about them, but only what the characters themselves do and say. So I like to be on the outside of all this. Let the book speak for itself. If a film is moved from, if a story is moved from a book to a play or to a film, I like that to be done by the experts in that field, by the playwright and by the screenwriter. I want to have him to interpret this story the way that he sees it for that different medium. For me to try to dictate how something should be done on the stage or on the film, I would reject very much. I would just completely leave that in the hands of somebody else who knew that medium.
Do you have another question? Right over there.
In pursuing that a little bit farther, it seems to me that you're saying that you make an attempt to impute as little as possible into your characters, in their selection, in their development, and in their relationships in your novels, short stories, etc. If that's true, then it seems that you're just presenting some sort of a literary Rorschach test where the reader is forced to sort of look at a fictional historical circumstance and draw his own conclusions. I don't see that you could possibly develop a story on any basis at all without inserting your own ideas and opinions into it and making it your story rather than their story. How can you do that? You really seriously saying that?
Well, let me try to say this. Of course, every writer writes on the basis of his personal experience. So naturally that colors his writing, because if he has had no familiarity, we'll say, with the wheat fields of North Dakota, he could not very well write about that. So he does have to put into his fiction what he knows or has seen or experienced. So naturally he's going to be influenced by his own knowledge, or even by his lack of knowledge, we might say. Now, as for influencing the characters, you say, as you said it now, let me put it this way. Suppose you said I write a story, but I don't try to influence the reader by giving my philosophies and so forth. Now, when you select your friends, you would select your friends on the basis of your sympathy or your sympathetic attitude towards this person, not because he wore a certain kind of suit or he had a certain kind of haircut, but you would select this friend and make friendship with him only on the basis of how sympathetic your two ideas were, whether you could work together or play together or study together or whatnot. So the same thing in writing. You have to select out of that bland story, we'll say. Sure, it might be a bland story, but there's something there that you might be influenced by that I would not put there. But it would appeal to you just as this fellow over here appeals to you as a friend, and you might reject this other fellow over here. That's the way I could explain it.
As a writer, if you're going to be chronicling like a certain segment of life that you want to write about, you're actually going to be writing your interpretations of that life to the reader, who's going to then interpret them from your writing of it. But it will still be your interpretations of the life that's around you that you're writing about. So it's not entirely objective. Say if you're going to be describing the South at a particular time, that you live there, and you're going to be writing about it, it'll be just your interpretation of the South as you saw it. And your characters will just be structures to explain your interpretation. Is that right, the way you're...
Well, as I understand, what goes into this character, as the writer will describe him, will put things into this description of him that are, we might say, are essential to understand his character, or in other words, how to identify him. Now, this might be a very sparse description. It may only say he's 6 feet tall and 2 feet wide or something. But the object is to put something there as sparsely as possible, not fulsomely, not just page after page of identifying this character, because you are going to form a mental image of this character yourself that the author never intended to put in there, because you're going to relate this character to somebody that you have known. And so you're going to relate the character in the book to somebody else, and if there's enough raw material there, you're going to build up that character in your own mind, whereas another reader over here will have an entirely different conception. Now, if you had everything cut and dried, so to speak, so that everybody's going to get the same mental image of this character, well, then I think it's very poor fiction. I think it's very poor fiction.
Let's pursue that question. Right here.
Well, then if you're defining a character that you're leaving open to interpretation, isn't that character still going to have like a certain, like something that everybody will see in that character that will be in common? I mean, if you're going to make any type of individual character at all, you'd have to have a certain amount of material that would be similar to all people, and then they could go off on their individual tangents and interpret him differently. But there has to be something there that everybody would see, otherwise he wouldn't be a character. He would just be something that would be too abstract. Yeah, I mean, like if you're going to create the person that's supposedly wicked, well, everybody would have a different idea of his wickedness or what it means to them, but you'd have to put enough there for the people to see that he's wicked. Do you see what?
Well, I understand what you mean by putting a note there, but just compare that to a motion picture film where you have a character on the stage, you see his complete dress, you see all of his mannerisms, you see the color of his hair, the color of his eyes, you hear his speech and he'll say certain words over and over again, you get a rhythm out of his speech maybe, or whatever it is, but you see the complete character in this picture. Well, that's all he is. Then what have you got? You've got this actor up here who can, and you know he's an actor. He's not a real person. He's an actor. And he's already been built. He's completely clothed. His mind is just solid like this. But you take away that picture and you write about this same personality. Now, when you write about him, you're not going to fill in all these details, these chalk marks and these blue pencil things and everything like that. You're going to pick out something about this one character that identifies him in your mind, just as you have friends, we'll say, or you have acquaintances that you identify by the sound of their voice. You don't have to see their face. The sound of the voice identifies these people to you on the telephone. So the same way in a character in the book, you have to leave something open there to fill in. Now, if you abhor this character, if you dislike this character, then you're going to find something derogatory about him to identify him in your mind. If you are pleased with his character, you're going to find out some fine point that makes you sympathetic towards him and want to keep up the friendship.
Mr. Caldwell, Kenneth Burke wrote an essay about you called Erskine Caldwell as a Maker of Grotesques. There are other writers that could be considered artists of the grotesque, like Sherwin Anderson or William Faulkner, or maybe in a sense John Steinbeck. Do you have any thoughts on why so many characters in contemporary fiction come out abnormal or perverted or deformed or grotesque in some way?
You want me to a parallel with contemporary fiction, as you say?
I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on why so many characters in contemporary fiction are treated as grotesque.
Characters of other writers' works? Yes. Well, you see, well, whether this is the age of the grotesque, I don't know. I don't know whether I was even in an age of the grotesque when he wrote that essay. But you see, a writer sees different things. No two writers see the same thing. You see, well, you might say you see a collective action over here, and so you get 2 or 3 writers writing about the same thing. They'll probably write the same thing themselves. They're just described as over here just as it actually is, realistically. But when a writer is alone, his mind is going to not twist around or contort, but he's going to find out what makes that person grotesque, we'll say, or what makes it a little bit extraordinary in some sense, whether it's a good or bad sense. He's searching. You see, he's not an actual person. I mean, no character in a novel is an actual person. He never could be. So this is a mental image that the writer has to have, and he may form it out of a half a dozen people and put them together. But if it comes out in an age, or contemporary age, we'll say, as of today, well, naturally we have an atmospheric condition of the grotesque. You could call it a lot of other things too, but we do have an atmospheric condition that the contemporary writer is going to write. He's going to write about this situation and this over here and this thing here. So what he's doing is translating the actual life that's going on, but he's using fictitious people to do it. He's not using an actual person. Now, I don't think he's going to inject his own philosophies into this. He's going to try to get the collective body together, so to speak, and put it in the form of one character or several characters. So what we'll say, if the agitation over here about something and agitation over here about something, well, that atmospheric condition is certainly going to influence his writing, but he's going to have to symbolize it in 1, 2, or 3 characters that he imagines, not actual living people.
Okay, let's have one more question right over here. So let's take it up here.
Mr. Caldwell, where is there a market today for a short story writer that's just starting out? With all the big national magazines drying up and everything, where is there a market?
Well, I wish I knew where there were one. You're quite correct, because it's, you see, to me, the writing of short stories is a very important thing for a person who wants to be a fiction writer, because you have to start somewhere, and when you start with the short form, you're in much better shape to make that worthwhile effort than you are if you're going to write a long novel of 500 words, we'll say. Now, where can you publish these short stories? I don't know. The fiction magazines have dried up. The national magazines have cut down to 1 or 2 stories, and they pretty much have a pattern. They're written in the back room, I think, all by one and the same person. They all sound alike. So what you can do is a matter of practice, as I know, to practice the writing of a short story until you are just convinced that you've got the world beat right there with that particular story, and then just badger magazines until you can find one who's going to do it. That seems to me to be about the only method Many years ago, there were a great number of experimental magazines called so-called little magazines that published great amounts of fiction. Well, they're hard to find these days, but a few do exist. So you might not get paid for it if you got it published in one of these isolated pamphlet type of little magazines, but at least you see it in print, and it might give you an inspiration to wait out the time when you can get a story in a paying situation in a large magazine. And of course, the practice won't hurt you writing a short story. Never hurts anybody who wants to be a writer. I think it's a much better pastime of effort than trying to write poetry.
Okay, thank you very much for coming.